Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR Newstalk 90.7. Putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
First indictments have come down in the Mueller investigation. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. Former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort and the campaign official Rick Gates have been indicted in the Russia investigation. Special counsel Robert Mueller has charged them with conspiracy against the United States, conspiracy to launder money, among other offenses. Meanwhile, George Papadopoulos, who was involved with the foreign policy side of the campaign, has pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI with contacts with the Russians. The administration has emphasized that much of the Manafort and Gates charges involve conduct predating the campaign. Meanwhile, Papadopoulos' plea has led to the withdrawal of Sam Clovis, who supervised him on the campaign, from a post in the U.S. Agriculture Department. Sort out these latest developments in our studio, Salisbury University political science professor Michael Laughlin. Welcome to the program.
Good morning.
So what do you make of these indictments? Some suggest that this is the first shoe to drop, that there are more to come. And they are almost sort of bookends, because on the one hand you've got Manafort and Gates, particularly Manafort, big high-profile name. On the other hand, nobody's ever heard of George Papadopoulos, who's like on the lower part of the food chain. Where do you assess where we are?
Well, I think the analysis that's persuasive here is that this indicates that the Mueller investigation is going forward quite rapidly, much more rapidly than, for example, was the case under the Watergate situation. But it is essentially identifying a big fish with Manafort and a tiny fish with Papadopoulos. But the Papadopoulos case is the conversations. And here's a guy who clearly wishes to tell the story and wishes to essentially explain who he talked with, what he said, and is really setting up a case where this investigation is just really beginning in this respect. That those who say that, well, this is the end point, I think are it's wishful thinking, really coming from the White House.
So one of the key moments, I think, in terms of this story has got to be a March 2016 meeting in which we have Papadopoulos, we have Jeff Sessions, and we also have Donald Trump. And apparently Papadopoulos merges with this idea about setting up some kind of meeting between Trump and Putin, and obviously then revealing his connections or his contacts with the Russians. It seems to me that really kind of begins to reach beyond just simply the outer layers, which we maybe have occasional contacts, meetings, right up to Donald Trump. I mean, Trump is clearly present during these conversations.
Absolutely. And here, this really, I think that the picture in itself tells 1,000 words, because it reveals that there was a meeting at which Papadopoulos clearly had a place at the table and explained this possibility of setting up a meeting between Trump and Putin. And that reports clearly that Trump did not dismiss the idea. He listened through the idea and didn't say this meeting is at an end. Any talk about connections with Russia, of course, are off the table. No one said that. Now Sessions apparently reports that he didn't want this thing to happen. But what's clear with Sessions is he's not a credible source, because it reveals, once again, his essentially inability to tell the truth over the course of time, where he has constantly said he had no connections with any Russian officials, and at no time did he know of anybody who had connections. And clearly he's at a meeting now with Papadopoulos, who clearly is admitting he's had plenty of connections and that he could set this meeting up. So I think the veneer, the credibility of the Trump people right at this point in terms of connections with Russia is clearly collapsed. And hence the investigation has many leads to follow now. And so it's a matter of time as to how this thing's going to play out, and that Trump himself is clearly a target of this investigation.
How do you assess, by the way, how the White House has handled this? And I understand there's really two camps now going on. One is sort of the Ty Cobb, Jay Sekulow camp, which are the lawyers, saying respond cautiously. We're going to cooperate with the investigation. On the other hand, on the outside, you have people like Steve Bannon, for example, amongst many, who said we have to attack the special prosecutor, the independent counsel. How do you assess those two tacks, and what does that say about where the Trump and the White House is?
In both camps, there's a calculation about the politics of this. If we assume for the moment that Trump is in deep trouble, particularly with obstruction of justice charges, his lawyers have to be saying the best we can hope for here is that the Mueller campaign, the Mueller investigation gets derailed in some fashion or other, or if it actually reaches us, we essentially can say we cooperated as much as possible, and you'll be in a better position there politically than you would if you fight this tooth and nail. Where the Bannon folks are saying is fight it tooth and nail, the politics, the Republicans in the Senate and in the House, they will not impeach. They'll not pursue that because of their own political needs. Whereas I think the Cobbs of this world are saying, well, it could go the other way. It could very much go the other way, and your best bet is to cooperate at this point in time.
How do you compare this, say, for instance, to the Whitewater and the investigation Special Counsel Ken Starr against Clinton in terms of the White House response? Because the White House did trash Ken Starr. A lot of folks said lots of bad things. On the other hand, Starr's investigation seems to sort of not only go on forever, but there were instances where they had made conclusions about certain aspects of it, including, for instance, Vince Foster. He concluded early on that he had committed suicide, but that wasn't known until much later on. How do you compare the two scandals in that respect?
In one respect, clearly, both investigations had wide latitude to investigate really wherever they thought reason would take them. On the other hand, I think the gravity of this case, the gravity of this situation with Russian interference in our elections, is much heavier than was the case under the Ken Starr and the Whitewater investigation, and I think that ultimately, if in fact Mueller does reveal, if more indictments come forward, the Republicans in the Congress are going to have to, they're going to be put on the defensive much more, I think, than was the case under the Whitewater investigation.
Although I'm reminded, actually, this morning somebody mentioned the fact that during Watergate, on the impeachment committee, because they never got to a full vote, there were only something like 7 Republicans actually voted for the articles of impeachment. That doesn't serve well for this idea. Yes. I mean, because a lot of it had already been laid out, and it actually took a tape in order to make it happen. I mean, it sounds like there's going to be real reluctance, and then obviously impeachment went forward in a Congress that was actually dominated by the opposite party.
That is all true. The question, though, remains if in effect that the collusion case. I mean, it really does ride on how much evidence ultimately comes down with the collusion case. If the collusion case becomes evident, becomes overwhelmingly, manifestly evident, then the Republicans have another thing to think about, because clearly the polls are showing that Mueller has good support among the public, that he's truthful, he's pursuing the proper investigation, and the erosion of the support for Trump, it continues. I mean, down in the low 30s now, and the evidence of his lying. I mean, clearly Trump has lied his way to this point, and the evidence may come out further that he's further lying manifestly.
Well, it seems to me, by the way, there are two dimensions. One is obviously the case for collusion, which may or may not be illegal, right?
Correct. That's
and
correct.
then you have the potential for obstruction of justice in terms of firing Comey. As I understand it, matter of fact, the Mueller is now looking at talking to Jared Kushner, who apparently was involved in some fashion with the firing of Comey. Of those two, which do you think is more significant politically? Is it obstruction of justice, or is it collusion, or could Republicans live with collusion but not obstruction, or vice versa?
I think the collusion charge politically is the more important, the more long lasting. Because if you can show collusion, then for the Republicans, they have to face the question of whether they're willing to live with a president who has, in effect, coordinated efforts with a foreign power that has been, particularly from the Republican point of view, over the course of decades, has been our most important enemy in international affairs, and how they can carry that weight forward. The obstruction of justice, however, carries the greater danger to Trump himself, I think, in terms of being indicted. I mean, after all, the obstruction of justice case is a criminal offense, most clearly, whereas a collusion case is less. I mean, there's less opportunity there for identifying some laws that have been broken, although there are going to be some of those as well.
What about this idea that he may decide, Donald Trump, to pardon some people, and which he certainly clearly can do? Obviously, it does not affect any kind of state actions, states, against, say, somebody like Manafort, but that he could just simply, one by one, sort of, okay, I'm going to pardon this person, I'm going to pardon this person, because he was such a good guy and that kind of thing. Obviously, he can do that. Are there repercussions for doing that? I know Lindsey Graham, for instance, senator, said that holy hell would break out if he fired Mueller, for example. Is there a political price to pay? I mean, is there enough there to say we've had enough?
One scenario is that he could get away with that because he clearly paid no price for his pardon of the sheriff from Arizona.
Right.
And Trump clearly has indicated either a blindness or an uncaring thought about the repercussions for the Republican Party going forward. So that scenario would say he could, particularly if it's piece by piece, if it's Manafort, Carter Page, or Papadopoulos, or even him, right? He could pardon him as well. And there's a strategy behind that, because if all these folks believe, and clearly Manafort, I think his lawyer really basically called on Trump to pardon Manafort, in effect, that they're playing that card, and as long as they keep quiet, then Trump can come forward with these pardons, and the Republicans could stay mute. I mean, it's one thing to give pardons, another thing to fire Mueller. I mean, I think what Graham was saying, you got to let this investigation go, and perhaps we can cover you with these pardons. On the other hand, do the pardons really further erode the Republican brand going forward? I mean, I think that's what these Republican leaders have to be assessing.
Do you think that if he were to issue a pardon for some of these folks, that's may, from a political standpoint, be an admission of guilt?
Most certainly. I mean, I think that at this point, what's clear and what's becoming increasingly clear is that these connections, that these folks were, I mean, that they were part of the campaign, and it was a small campaign, and people knew what was going on, including Donald Trump. So there's going to be a political cost to be paid there.
So it seems as if Jared Kushner, people are bad-mouthing him, to say the least, out of the White House. I mean, we had Sam Nunberg, he was advisor to Trump, called him the worst political advisor in the White House in modern history. We hear now that some reports that Trump has blamed Kushner for the decision, for instance, to fire Comey, for example. And apparently Trump has complained about Kushner in conversations with Steve Bannon and Roger Stone, who's another political operative. I mean, it sounds like the knives are out, and he could be the next to go. And then on the other hand, if you're Jared Kushner, maybe it's time to get out, although he's obviously married into the family, but maybe turn state's evidence or something. I mean, I don't know.
This is this is one of those mysteries that we may, in the next few weeks, we may find out, because Kushner is indeed apparently cooperating with the investigation, Mueller's investigation. He's talking. He's revealed papers, and it could be very well the case that he wants to cover his own back at this point. And may turn state's evidence. On the other hand, again, if he stays mute, relatively speaking, and even if he were to be indicted for some of these affairs, would Trump pull out the pardon for his son-in-law? I mean, this is very sticky, because it's a family relationship here that's also at risk. But again, Trump does at times often seems that those things don't matter either for him.
By the way, one name that's gotten lost is in the scandal has been Sean Spicer. He's a White House spokesman, but apparently he was notorious for copious notes. So there's not only whatever he saw, but then there's a whole set of notes. How significant might he be in this, and the fact that we haven't heard anything about him yet?
Again, the question becomes how much was he a part of the inner circle, and one would assume that, given that he was the White House spokesperson, and that he would have to be involved in many of these meetings. And I think that part of it will involve whether or not his notes and his reporting, his information corroborates other pieces of information coming forward, perhaps with Kushner as well. So he, at the end of the day, he could be playing a very important role. Though I guess I don't think he's been interviewed recently on this, right? So, but perhaps if we see that he's re-interviewed, and now that all these other things have been revealed, could Spicer say more and contribute more to this case? I think that's one thing we should watch for as well.
So looking at the politics of this thing, where do you see the Democrats in all of this? They seem to be sort of standing back, watching all this happen while they kind of denounce various dimensions of this.
Yeah. Well, you don't interfere with a train that's wrecking, right? Going smashing into walls of various sorts. So I think that at the end of this the day, the Democrats benefit clearly from this kind of scenario, and this is this president his credibility is collapsed. It cannot be regained. Even if he survives the next year, the Republicans are going to be fighting against this image of corruption, this image of collusion with the Russians and interference with the elections. But on the other hand, I think I'm persuaded as well that the Democrats can't rely simply on that to win a wave election in 2018. Policy agenda has to be forthcoming, and I think that that is still unclear. I mean, so I don't think in any sense the Republicans can simply sit back and say we can easily win this next round of elections. They've got to get a policy agenda moving forward as well, and really clarify that for the electorate.
So what do you make of two things? One is we have this story coming out about Donna Brazile talking about the Clinton folks taking over the DNC. Obviously, the Bernie Sanders people not happy about that one. Neither was she, for that matter. And at the same time, you get this pile on from the White House over the scandal, but in allegations about this dossier on Trump, and the fact that the Clinton campaign, or the DNC anyway, took over funding for this opposition research. There seems to be that sort of thing sort of coming at the Democrats. The
Democrats as well. Let me take the dossier issue first. I think it's actually irrelevant as to who who was involved in the funding of the dossier. I mean, you go back, first it was a Republican operative, right? And then the Democrats get in and say this is pursuing opposition research, and a company gets hired, this fusion company gets hired, and they hire an investigator to do it. So the origins, there's no indication that there was manipulation of the actual findings in the dossier. So the question really is, whoever funded it, does the dossier provide credible evidence as to what was going on with the Trump campaign? I mean, that's really clear. And it's pretty clear as well now that congressional committees, and again, even Republican-controlled congressional committees, are finding this dossier credible. And the Mueller investigation clearly has found part of this dossier credible as well. So I don't think that will play any significant role for the Democrats in the election. Let's see, what was the other issue?
And Donna Brazile.
Yeah. Now, this one is fascinating because one must remember that Donna Brazile was a very important player and trusted player within the Clinton campaign itself. I mean, this was a loyalist. So when this revelation came out, I was taken aback in that sense that here's Donna Brazile, who that the Sanders people have long disliked because of her complete loyalty to the Clintons, and what this shows, I think, is the problem in the Democratic Party as well here now. Is it shows that it was essentially controlled by the Clinton campaign, in a sense, bought and sold. And I think much repair has to be done. I mean, I think that this could generate a division within the Democratic Party that cannot. That's a great risk to them for winning the 18 election and the 20 election. So much work has to be done, I think, to say we're going to put in rules that this will never happen again. I think some of the Sanders people, I think that his campaign manager, in fact, has recently said, that this. Obviously, he complained about this, but that there are now attempts to make sure that the rules governing the Democratic Party will ensure this kind of thing does not happen in the future. If that can be ensured, and if he can persuade the Sanders rank and file, the voters out there, that that's the case, then the Democrats can get beyond this. But work has to be done to do that, I think.
Well, because one of the questions I have in terms of Democratic politics is how much alienation this just simply reinforces by the Sanders voters who, I mean, it's all well and good to talk about, well, now we got to set a whole new set of rules, but they're still disaffected, and very well could, for that matter, affect particularly the Virginia governor's race. There seems to be some disaffection there.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, the immediate consequence of this could hurt Northam's campaign. I think that's an excellent point. But it can't have other. I mean, again, down the road to peace, the 18 election is just on the horizon, and disaffection could occur there as well.
Do you think, or do you see the Democratic Party trying to figure out who it is, or are the two groups, the sort of establishment and the Sanders wing, are they that far apart in terms of policy?
My sense at this point is the answer is that they are not so far apart, and because I think that part of it is that the energy from the Sanders camp, that's the energy that I think is driving the party at this point in time. And so if we can call it the establishment folks represented by, say, Hillary Clinton, they at this point have to be reading this as if they want to get back in power, just to make the Democrats regain the House, they're going to have to tap into that energy. And if they don't pay attention to that in terms of policy matters, the disaffection will prevent them from regaining power in the 18 or even the 20 election. So my anticipation would be that once we see the policy agenda emerge, the tilt will be more towards a more progressive character to it. Yeah.
I mean, because we have a number of potential presidential candidates who already come out in favor, for instance, single payer.
Yes, right.
I think that's really interesting.
That would be one of the most. I mean, if in fact that becomes sort of one of the banner agenda pieces, then that tells us a lot about the political dynamics operating in the Democratic Party.
We've been speaking with Salisbury University political science professor Michael Laughlin about not only the scandal, but also where the Democrats are. Appreciate you stopping by and talking with us.
My pleasure.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Production and audio engineering by Chris Frank. Hosted by Don Rush. For podcasts, visit delmarvapublicradio.net or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on Pack 14.